The Media Project. SM Graves Associates is partnered with Rove Creations to offer design-build services in residential and mixed-use development. We believe in building neighborhoods from the bottom up. We're dedicated to solving the middle market housing challenge in both rural and urban environments. If you'd like to engage an innovative and detail-oriented design-build firm, we'd like to hear from you. Find out more at smgravesassociates.com/community development.
In an age of decentralizing the map when it comes to venture capital, place takes center stage for an increasing number of communities whose neighborhoods benefit from innovation centers, co-working space, workforce development space, and the like. Our guest, Robert Pieroni, has his own story to tell in founding Downtown Launchpad in Houston, Texas. He's a successful ecosystem builder and is currently director of Italian business development for our good friends at Generator. And he's with us today to recount his experience building space and the programming to ignite it. Robert, welcome to the Are We Here Yet podcast. Good to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me. Just happy to be here and always humbled that you want to have a conversation with me about a little bit of my journey.
That's a good attitude to have. We haven't even asked you any questions yet, so it's good. We'll see how you feel at the end.
Exactly. Yeah, the ending of this might be completely different. We'll find out.
So at the core, your background is in economic development. When you started this project in particular, the Downtown Launchpad, was this, I want to ask first, was this a real estate challenge that you were helping to solve or an innovation challenge or both?
That's a good question. I'll throw a little bit of curveball to start. It was actually not either. It was a people challenge. I've always believed that everything needs to start with what is your purpose? What is your why? Even when you're building a startup, there's got to be a problem that you're solving. And there was a people having access to quality things related to startups, venture capital, ecosystem. So really, it was a people thing first, and then it was figuring out what was necessary to solve that. So as you look through the puzzle pieces, it became a real estate play. It became an innovation hub with different resources, and I call them components and actors and stakeholders. But at the end of the day, it was driving towards an outcome for people. And it was about equality and economic vitality for a community in a different genre.
So I can hear that. Now, what was missing then in the industry or industries around? I mean, Houston, we're talking Houston, Texas, oil, commodities town. But so it wasn't as though it was an impoverished and deindustrialized center in South Texas. What was missing, though? To give us some more context.
Absolutely. So what's funny about Houston, Texas, it's probably one of the most innovative cities the world has ever seen, if you really think about it. The artificial heart, the man on the moon, fracking, like it or not, the energy capital of the world, beautiful economy, always roaring, but it was always in what? Centralized industries. So it was always tied to really large industries, and those are hard industries to actually break into. So if you think about someone that's from Houston, that's worked here their whole life, but really doesn't have a background in one of these three legacy industries that Houston has been a front runner in forever, how do you actually get into creating something new?
So it was really truly that access to entrepreneurship. That's like that conundrum of access in its truest form then.
Absolutely. It was, we're not a B2C SaaS, or we're not really a consumer facing tech market, which is the easiest entry for most people because you're looking at the largest customer base. You're not trying to sell into corporations or major institutions. And so you looked around coming out of the Amazon H2Q proposal, and we had maybe one incubator in town. The fourth largest city in America, the fourth largest regional metro in America. We have one, and that's where we're running with. It's where were people supposed to go for access to quality education and entrepreneurism to really spark the next creation of their idea?
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about, and the programming is the important part here, right? And how you laid that out. So I'd like you to describe what was going on inside your four walls, but then I want you to tell us why you did it that particular way and how you came to that. I think there's a lot to learn in the, why did you do it that way? How did you get to that point?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. This. My favorite part is it was taking a really hard step back to look at what does an individual take, how do they take an idea from ideation all the way through scaling and maturity, and then sitting back and saying, okay, if we're going to build programming related to that, we need to sit back and think about ideation. Then what happens after someone comes up with this idea? They need to go into some sort of pre-acceleration program. Generator. We brought Generator to Houston. It is, in my opinion, the best pre-accelerator program in the country and the world. And we're out to prove that mission every day. And I think our community mission is who we are. We want to help communities invest in their best and their brightest, regardless of race, place, and gender. And so as I started out a little bit of this conversation, that's what we're solving for at Generator. And that was my core purpose in my life, was how do I help people advance themselves every day and provide them those resources? So Generator was natural in that pre-acceleration phase. But then what happens after that? We went in another Boston-based accelerator, Mass Challenge. We went out and convinced John Hawthorne at the time and Mass Challenge to expand and open in Houston, Texas, because we knew when companies got to that next stage, they needed to be supported to push them into the next phase. And so the thing we started thinking, though, or I did, was, but what after that? And this is the part that most communities always miss on. And I always say it's the wraparound resources. So we went, got Impact Hub, partnered with Impact Hub Houston. It's a great organization. I think it's the largest incubator in the world. Wow. And an incubator versus an accelerator is very different. And so what they do is they give constant programming, constant resources available to people in the community. So a company who went through Generator's G-Beta Accelerator can get wraparound resources 10, 12 months later from an incubator within that same ecosystem to continue to help them to iterate on their ideas and grow bigger, faster, and stronger. And so it was putting all of these pieces logically together and then saying, you know what else would be nice? If we had a coworking operator, because when they leave one of these accelerators, they needed to go somewhere. So we partnered with a coworking operator, which gave them a low cost solution to stay within that same vertical building. And then because we said, why not? We said, let's put them inside this building that is a bank. It's owned by a bank, which is incredible, but they're a really large SBA lending bank. And so when you think about access to capital, there's venture capital, there's private equity, there's angel investing, then there's SBA grants, which are probably one of the things that most people need to learn about. But it's a great source for early stage entrepreneurs to really spark their ideas.
So you have an ecosystem within your four walls that in which the entrepreneur can learn about financial stacking, and all of the debt or equity instruments are sort of represented in the building, which is not just a matter of convenience, but in an age of remote working, which is great. Okay, in so many different ways. There's still these key moments where it's good to be part of a network of people actually culminating in one space, and that you have immediate access to people. And I'm going to guess that within your programming, you could actually create these, we commonly call them in the co-working sphere, collisions all the time strategically, so that people were learning in real time, exactly what it can take at the different phases that their businesses has different debt or equity needs.
Absolutely. When you have that many quality programs, which I believe at the time was the only place in the US, maybe even the world, that you had two top ranked accelerators co-located, then you add one of the largest incubators in the world, you have access to a mentor network that, in my opinion, has probably not been seen before. And so you had so many quality people coming through this space that just wanted to help the next generation of entrepreneurs accelerate and create their ideas, create their businesses. And to me, I still think it's just such a magical place when you think about that, and you think about people from the community coming together to help each other. I mean, that's how original civilization was created, was people came together in community to advance things, and that's what we should be doing. And it's the heart of a city. And this city, and I'm biased, I'm in Houston, Texas. This is one of the most beautiful, passionate cities for humans there is in the US or even the world. And it shows, because our ecosystem is accelerating at a pace that is not seen normally.
And you know what, one aspect of this that I think a lot of listeners that also work in economic development in particular should take note of is, you guys decided we're going to be, you didn't internally create an education program. You didn't internally create really any programming. You brought in the best and the brightest that you could. And I also, just as an aside here, some context for people. We're talking about a window of time here that you've been working on this is like from 2017 or more or less to now, right? So very short period of time. And Houston as a whole, you know, kudos to you. You brought Mass Challenge in. In that time, you also, just in the last 3 years, you have also from Boston, Greentown Labs, you know, started in the Innovation District on the waterfront, and grew out to have a full facility in Somerville, Mass, just within Metro Boston. And then, you know, first location outside of Massachusetts, Houston, Texas, which made a lot of sense. Sustainability, energy. Right? Go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, what you have to think on that, and this is something else that makes Houston unique. And for all the economic development folks that might be out there listening, the Greater Houston Partnership, which is our regional economic development chamber of commerce, is really good at what they do. And they identified Greentown Labs early on, and it made sense. And Emily, at the time, who was running Greentown Labs, saw, you know, you have a city that is built on energy, but you had a city that was built on forward thinking towards energy transition. And it was led by Mayor Turner, the Greater Houston Partnership, Rice University, and all University of Houston, and all these incredible actors who put down whatever flag they might have been flying at the time because they represented something, to come together and say, this is our city, and we're going to transition our city from here in the energy sector, energy capital of the world, to the energy transition capital of the world. And we're running at it at a pace that's not been seen before, but it is because we had leaders like GHP, the CEO at the time, Bob Harvey, really pushing this agenda forward, and the city backed it because we believed in that mission. And so really excited that Greentown Labs is here. And it's in a really awesome area of town next to Rice University, who built a massive innovation hub called the Ion, because they wanted to make a commitment to the city just like everyone else was.
Yeah, and where your place is part of a much longer corridor, right? For one, of innovation that continues to grow. And you guys remained sort of industry agnostic. I think you remain industry agnostic to this day, right? Do you consider that to be like much more of a market responsive approach? You know, like, we want to have did you guys really intentionally say, here's the resources people need, here's the access that they need, but we're going to let the market decide what industry, what solution they want to offer people, and we want to be here for just about everybody?
Yeah, well, I do have to say I'm no longer there, so I want to make sure. You know, I now am long gone, but I'm part of, you know, Generator. But when I set out to build that project with the guidance of someone I look up to, anyone who knows urban planning, a guy named Bob Urey, he's just an icon in the space. You know, we talked about what should this place look like and be, and I always thought it should be the community. Rice University is one of the best institutions in the US, and they were going to go and put in a hub, and then you're going to see a lot of academic, you know, tech transfer and commercialization of IP, and you're going to see major corporations going there to do what they need to do to, you know, look at innovation and so on. You have Greentown Labs. You have the medical center, the largest medical center in the world, made a massive commitment to build what's called TMC3. It'll become one of the most premier innovation hubs for med tech anywhere in the world very soon. And so we thought, you know, why don't we build something for the community, something where everyone feels welcomed, somewhere that everyone in the community, regardless, similar to the generator model of race, place, or gender, feels like this is their home. And so we built it to be and look and feel like that, which is why our three partners were who they were. And I think, Scott, as we talked earlier, kind of in a kind of pre-conversation, we also built it in the most accessible place in Houston. It was the only place at the time that was accessible by rail, by long-range commuter bus, and local bus. And the reason that we built it there was because we set out to say anyone who wants access to entrepreneurial resources can have access to it. You might have to take one or two buses, and I understand that is hard, but we understood that it needed to be accessible to everyone, regardless of where you came from and what your socioeconomic background was.
Take note, everybody listening, right? If you want a more walkable, bikeable, livable city, you put the important stuff where people can get there regardless of their transportation needs, right? Absolutely. So one of those core things, you know. Walk us through, I guess, if you can. I mean, so this is a little different than, you know, if you're making a real estate play and you put together your financial stack, right? But maybe you can walk us through from your standpoint, you know, how did you guys fund this whole thing, right? Okay. Because now you're involving, so we understand the advantages to being market responsive, to have any number of different programs, right, come and make use of the space, and the different ways that, of course, the consumer, the entrepreneur can use the space. But then, you know, how did you make all that happen? I'm going to guess that you've mentioned several of them. There's a whole cadre of different organizations involved. Was there both public and private money? Is it different now? Did it sort of like wean itself off and have a percentage of this that's sustainable with private revenue? Or walk us through a bit of that.
Well, I'll say it's probably still finding its way because it's still a little bit of a young ecosystem here.
And that's just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't make apologies for that as long as things are still rocking and rolling, you know?
Exactly. Downtown Launchpad opened in June of 2020. So, you know, the kind of times we were in. So it's still pretty young.
It's the perfect time during a global health crisis. Why not? You know?
Exactly. Hey, here's a 17,000 square foot innovation hub with 3 incredible resources and a giant open space with lots of desks for people to come and chase their dreams.
Well, listen, I got a good friend, entrepreneur and educator, Pete Spellman, told us, you know, 30 years ago, start when the wave is at the bottom. You have plenty of time to learn, and you're ready when the wave crests. You know, I like that, you know.
Exactly. No, and so each of the components within the innovation corridor will have different funding partners. The Downtown Launchpad specifically, I'll talk a little bit about. In the state of Texas, you have TIRS, so tax increment finance districts, or TIFs. And it's funny, no matter where you are in the country, it's like the same tool, but there's always a different name. And so it's actually, you know, a very forward-thinking organization called the Downtown Redevelopment Authority. Used its financing and its funding to fund that project because it saw that it was an economic engine for that part of downtown that was historically probably underdeveloped. You still had a lot of parking lot islands or deserts, I think is kind of the more technical term. And there wasn't a lot of green space, but you had a lot of apartments that were blooming because that part of downtown years ago had what was called a downtown living initiative, where there was a incentive to build residential in that part of downtown, and people got, tax incentives to help do that. But if you know the history of downtown Houston living, I think there's probably 10,264 people that live there today. 150,000 people work there, but back forward, rewind. 10 years ago, there was probably 2,000 people living downtown.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the city really thought it needed to do something to spark that. And it was led by this Downtown Redevelopment Authority. And so that part of town was missing something like this. And so that was the funding that went into that. As you roll down this beautiful innovation corridor, Rice University stepped up, the Rice management entity, and stepped up to build what was called the Ion. So they took an old Sears building, beautiful building, and redid it. And it's just turned into this incredible hub. And they then went in and changed over a Fiesta, which is a grocery store. And that's where Greentown Labs lives today. And, you go into the Texas Medical Center, and this also goes to everyone out there. Quirky buildings sometimes work. I think TMC's first innovation hub was an old Nabisco cookie plant. So you really think like space, it's just space. It's the components within the space, and it's the actors and the people and the stakeholders who come into it that really change it over.
Yeah, here, right? Like, it's like a lot of co-working gets created because people think, well, it's cheap space for the consumer, so we'll be able to fill it that way, because we couldn't fill it in the more traditional sense. But unless you've got some reason for people to be there, right? That's what around these parts we generically call that the programming, right? But regardless of what you call it, you have to seed that ecosystem with the main components that drive reasons. You got to give people a reason to be there.
Yep.
And then the rest of it will follow, right? So what have been the results of all of this activity? What kind of whether they're numbers oriented or...
Oh, wow. Yeah, we don't have enough time for all that. But what I'll say is, statistically speaking, numbers never lie. So you can look at Startup Genome or any of those rankings, and we've shot up the rankings faster than just about any city in the world. We're now, I think, traditionally ranked as one of the fastest emerging top 5 in the world market. So we went from basically very low, let's say 44th in the world or the US, and have shot up to one of the most emerging in the world. So that's what that meant. But really what it means is, I wish I would have thought a little bit more about this, because it makes me think of people that I now get to call friends. It thinks of young ladies like Legina Harris with a company called the Us Space, and her going through our Generator G Beta program and seeing what she's done in the community as she's providing resources, and kind of seeing what it took her in her evolution. And it's the emails that I get from founders that have gone through programs and just thanking us that we brought these programs to their city. Sometimes it's hard to think about, because I get a little choked up, because we were a small blip in someone's their journey and their path. But it was such a big impact. And I think of there's companies like 05. It's this parking company I met 6 years ago, and I'm still in contact with Jay and Sarah almost monthly. And I've watched the evolution of their technology. Now it's being implemented in the city. And so as funny as this is going to sound to everybody on that's listening to this, we were standing at the Ion the other day, and it's a parking solution. So it's a hardware technology company. And I watched the arm of this parking infrastructure go up, and it says 05 on it. And I stood there with them, Jay and Sarah, and we took a picture together, the 3 of us, because it's part of that journey. And I've got to watch this evolution, and I've got to watch this evolution with so many companies and so many people that I think every day that the Redevelopment Authority and the Downtown Houston organizations made this commitment to the city and made this commitment to the people of the city. I could go on forever. We've had probably at this point 150 to 200 startups come through that space. And so getting to meet them.
That's a massive amount in such a short period of time.
Yes. It's a big city and we got a lot of people to help.
That's a great example you gave too, because it sort of speaks to this idea. I know this is bantered about probably a little too much, but it's still just, that's because it's a great idea. You know, where you act locally, think globally, right? You can, any sort of startup can, to scale massively, but it's still gonna fulfill a need or needs locally. And so when you actually see brands popping up around town, that are now going to potentially be all over the country, all over the region, that's got to be very satisfying. And to know that they're your neighbors. I mean, that they're actually able to make a living doing what they want to do. It's not just about the a sustainable pay to yourself as an entrepreneur or as an employee for another entrepreneur, but that the work you're doing is actually meaningful. That is to say, it's stuff you want to be doing with your time.
That was well said. And we've got to see technologies implemented all over the city by incredible founders because we gave them opportunities. We gave them an opportunity to chase their idea. And, when I give ecosystem presentations, sometimes I would put all the logos of all these different companies up and I would just talk through them. And, we had a young man come through there named Bobby with a company called DOS. And to see what he did in the real estate sector was incredible. And you just think through these stories. These are human stories. And to your point, I genuinely, and maybe it's just a weird outlook on life, is I think genuinely people just want to work hard. They want to provide for the people they love. And that's it. They want to put food on the table. And if you give them an opportunity to do that, and then give them an opportunity to do that, doing something they love, it's even more meaningful. And then, for communities, it's about hiring local too. If we invest in the best and the brightest from our own community, they're going to hire from our own community. I am very brazen about my comments related to a lot of things economic development. But I've always believed in local and building your own, because that's the only way you're going to lift up everyone in your own city.
Yeah, talk to that a little bit more. And what you mean is, homegrown, build from the bottom up, as opposed to what?
Historic, traditional. I'm sure you're going to get some fun comments, but traditional economic development. I'm not a giant fan of what we like to say is the capture game of how much can I provide in an incentive or an inducement to lure a company from one city to another. The reason I'm not a big fan of that is partly because they're bringing a workforce with them. They're bringing different things to this community that you could have built local, or it's going to take resources away or something like that. And so if you think of a company that relocates thousands of employees to one city, they're displacing jobs or job opportunities, but they're bringing in a flood of people. So now what's it do to housing? What's it do to transportation? It's all these downstream effects.
Yeah.
But it's also creating a larger barrier of inequity economically within that city. And then, on top of that, a lot of them are done with inducements or incentives and things along those lines. And what I just always ask a lot of my friends who are in the economic development world is, please be very mindful. Use resources like I used in a previous life, where we actually looked at what the economic impact of this relocation would be, all the way down to how many employees would relocate to the city and what would that do to the tax base and so on and so forth, to make sure you're not overextending yourself. Because when you do bring a company there, the city still has to pay for police, fire, hospitals, and all of these things to service this new massive employer. But if the subsidy outweighs that cost,
then all you're doing is designing bankruptcy for yourself. It's almost like designing sprawl that can't pay for itself and is subsidized by your downtown taxpayers, right? And it's a different manifestation of that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's actually really, first of all, that's really cool, but also that's fascinating. You guys actually took a look at some of what those, how did you measure some of those effects? And did
Uh,
you also measure, by the way, before you answer that, did you also measure what, whether it's negligible or not, poaching, I'm just going to call it what it is, poaching business from afar, would it have any real effect on employment from a local standpoint? Because this happens all the time where, oh, we're gonna have thousands of people come to work for us, and the reality is much less of a positive net effect on employment for people that were already there in your city.
I'll say in my previous life, it was nice as I actually used a company out of Austin, Texas, that this was kind of their thing. And so they had created essentially like a spreadsheet with many different formula inputs. And it was a very thoughtful way that they did it. And the state of Texas used them as well. And it would just go super granular because when you're really evaluating these type of things, you need to go as granular as possible, all the way down to what percentage of people do you think will actually move into your city? So if you're in, suburban city one, but there's 4 surrounding suburban cities, don't make the assumption that 100% move into yours.
Yeah.
Think of the sales tax base. You have to really be thoughtful. Do you have enough retail, soft goods, food and bev to serve that population? So if you're going to think, well, on the sales tax, we're going to make up for it, but if your city can't even serve that kind of demand, or if it's close enough to like a borderline of a city, could those people be eating elsewhere during lunch? And so you really have to start thinking through it. You have to start thinking through all of those little side effects when you're evaluating these things. And it's not easy. That's why I used a third party to create this for me. And then they would help us through this sometimes. And you would move the needle on the incentive and basically it would tell you you're now in the red. And once you hit the red, that means the city isn't doing well on this deal.
Yeah, you sound like you sound like you might be a fan of Chris Gibbons, economic gardening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. You're familiar. Yeah, I would think.
Absolutely. That's one of the great things, IADC. So at the International Economic Development Council, that is one of the programs they teach you.
Yeah.
And like I said, I spent a long time in that sector as well. And so you think of those, and then to your other question, they do say they're bringing in all these jobs, and that is correct. But they never said they were hiring all these jobs. And I feel like sometimes that part's overlooked. They're bringing a lot of new jobs to a community, but they're not hiring a lot of new jobs to a community. And I think that's one thing that for some reason just gets a little bit overlooked. And so if they're bringing new jobs to the community, the people there don't have opportunities to get them. And then you really think, you're holistic city development wide, do you even have the educational resources to upskill, reskill those jobs that are even coming into your community? So if you invested in those type of programs, so if you're in the logistics transportation space, if you invested in technical programs to solve what holes might be developed, because if they can't find it, they're going to import it. If you're bringing in someone large in the fintech or financial services space, do you even have a workforce that can meet that demand? I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into this that I think sometimes when people just take a very small view and they say, well, we just need to fill 70,000 square feet in a building that's empty, they're not really looking at the larger picture to see what is the downstream effect going to be on the community. There might not be, but you just don't know unless you actually spend the time to think very thoughtfully through it.
Yeah. Or in the first place, you dedicate yourself for all the reasons that you've stated and then some. You dedicate yourself in the first place to homegrown, your local market-based, business development as opposed to poaching, right? Companies from afar create something so attractive and so complete and such a natural functioning ecosystem that people want to come to you. And now you're not giving them freebies. I don't have to give tax incentives to somebody who says, I have to be a part of your ecosystem because it's where the value is for us. Right.
Yeah.
Which still happens. It's just that it for a while, it just wasn't the predominant model, you know?
Yeah. Not enough cities have, maybe it's they don't have the ability. There's a lot of factors that play into city like planning and things like that. But really it's taking the 10-year look instead of the 5-year, the 4-year, the
Yeah,
2-year
absolutely.
cycle. You really have to think through like what are all the things that we need to invest in to start to create our own homegrown. And there's smart people everywhere. You know, I love it. I mean, and I'm trying not to be too biased here on this podcast, but like that's what I love about Generator. If you look at the cities we're in, we go to any city because there is so much talent in every city around the world. To say that it can only happen in certain areas because XYZ population or this
Yeah.
school, this or this or this, it's not true.
I think locally people just, particularly if you're in a place that relatively recently deindustrialized, you know, if you live in a community, regardless of size or the history, if you live in a community that has not benefited from globalization or, you know, current economic trends, there's a shift that happens collectively. People just lack confidence, right? So it really does it. I don't know how you feel about this. It starts with internally as a group of people in your town, in your city, regardless of the size. You know, you got to have the confidence to say, you know, we're going to stick to these good. We're going to find the right good fundamentals, and we're going to stick to them. And we can, and we're going to have that long-term thinking versus short-term thinking and the confidence to do it because we have the confidence, you know, because we've made that decision to move with confidence.
You know, you're setting me up because I want to give a sports analogy so bad because I just love sports. But
Go
that's
ahead.
that's
I'm going
that's
to
where
let
you're
you do
going.
that. You do that. I'll make the jazz equivalencies, and you make the sports. That'll
I
work.
love it. But it is it's the sports analogy of why can any team beat any team on any given night? All it takes is a little bit of confidence. And once that ball starts rolling and you start to believe and you see it and you see someone else doing it, you see someone else doing it, once that ball is rolling, that's how we get great upsets. That's how the greatest heroes of all time, you know, sports figures were defeated or they became these heroes and these things that everyone aspires to be is because once that confidence starts getting built, it's hard to stop because people see it and they start living off it. And so every community, as they think through this, it's like someone invested in us. Okay, so we're moving this needle. And as all these communities have brought, you know, like a G Beta program to that city, that's a city kind of doing one of those, you know, where they hit their chest, they're planting their flag and saying, we believe in this community. You believe in this community. That's why you're here. We're giving you the resources. Now go win the game. And that's the way I feel a lot about when I talk about Generator all over the country, all over the world. And I talk all over the world about Generator. That's what I tell them. I say, you give people something, line of sight to something, and you tell them we believe just as much as anyone else. Once they start believing, that's how those game-winning shots that people were like, how did they do it? It's because the confidence was there. It's all confidence. It's all confidence driven. Every great startup ecosystem was driven because somebody did really well. And then everyone kind of just looked around and was like, well, if they can do it, then I can do it.
That's right. We actually really, we brought the G Beta program to Central Vermont recently, and it's going to launch in the spring. Just full disclosure, ladies and gentlemen, you know, partially because of hearing many stories like this, and that we heard these stories from people like you throughout. So not just the big cities like Houston, but like truly rural communities surrounded by nothing but rurality all over the country. You know, like that was something that was very interesting to me because, you know, just thinking about one of these long-term and very global things, thinking about both in terms of funding, like venture capital, but also just the jobs and where they go, you know, decentralizing. There are certain systems, complex systems we want to decentralize. And then there's others that actually it makes more sense to centralize them and they're not currently. But this is one of those places that we need to decentralize. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that coming from the big city as you are.
Yeah,
you know?
no, I do. But I have thoughts on it because it's what I believe and what I bought into. I've known Jonah and Troy, the founders of Generator, for 6 to 7 years now. I have not been here 6 or 7 years, but everything you see them do since the beginning of building this company was to invest in the best and the brightest, regardless of race, place, and gender. And it's been proven over and over. 84 to 90% of every company that Generator has ever invested in is outside those major tech hubs. It's not in San Francisco and California. It's not in Boston and Massachusetts. It's not in New York. It's in all these other places that everyone said, you can't do this, or it's a flyover state, or it's something along those lines. And at Generator, or at me, this is more of my opinion, maybe I don't believe that. I don't fundamentally believe that. And I think Generator has proven it doesn't matter where you are. We'll find you and we'll give you the resources and we will help you day over day, because everyone that works at Generator is absolutely committed to the mission and the cause of what we're trying to do. And people are starting to see that. We're talking to places, and I'll use this quick example. I'm talking to places in very southern rural Italy, where has historically been the most overlooked place, probably one of them in the world.
Well, and talk about brain drain too. I mean, all the young people simply leave. Actually, people have been emigrating out of that region for what, close to a century, more than a century.
Absolutely. And we're down there talking to regional leaders, elected officials, government officials, corporations, universities. We're telling them we want to be here. This is where we want to be. And we've proven it. I've been there multiple times this year, into Apulia and into the Campania region, showing them that Generator, we're committed to our mission regardless of place. We believe in this community. We want to believe in this community just as much as you do. And so we're doing that. And that's really what our mission is. And Joe and Troy set that standard a long, long time ago. And, with 11, 12 years later, we're still doing it. And it's kind of like one of those reasons why people say, why do you run through a wall for something? That's why.
The only thing harder than working through failure is when you're successful, and making sure that the success is consistent to its ideals over and over again. I mean, there is something to be said for that. There's an impetus for it. I mean, not only is it just, we can make the argument it's the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to do from a human standpoint, but inequality, a lack of access to the basic needs for entrepreneurship, capital, the networks of people you need, the mentors that you need to help propel the best ideas and the hardest working people. I mean, there's a real impetus there that, like, you can't create societies where there's 3 or 4 cities where 80% of the work can be accomplished, and then the rest of the place just sort of, goes by the wayside.
Absolutely. No, we and as humans, we need to stretch ourselves to think like that. We need to think about, everything we do. Are we advancing everyone together, or are we just kind of staying in our bubbles? And that's what I love about what I do every day. That's what I wake up doing every day, is thinking not what's here in my backyard in Houston anymore. And it's thinking, where's a community that nobody's talking about, and can I go talk to them? And I get to do that every day. And that's neat, because we want to make sure we're investing in everyone, regardless of what that looks like. We want to make sure that everyone has those same opportunities and accesses that every kid gets. And I'll say that in that context too, that, you go all over this world, and you see different people, and you see the economic disparity amongst many, and you sit back and think, we need to help inspire that next generation. We need to inspire the next generation of thinkers in those communities, and they need to see entrepreneurs and driving towards something, so they know they can create their own. And if we're not doing it there, they're going to leave. The brain drain is going to happen and continue to happen, because they're going to go where they see people can do it. And so unless they're doing it in those communities, people are just going to continue to leave.
Yeah, and you think the best the best effect for the maximum number of people to access the knowledge economy is best done in a decentralized fashion. In other words, having the ability to stay where you are, as opposed to everybody desperately. I don't know. I feel like the last 25 years, most of our adulthood, you and I are around the same age, has been taken up by like increasingly large urban centers that are surrounded by favelas of people desperately trying to cling economically to that place to try to get a shot at, everything we've talked about: access to capital, access to, being an entrepreneur, scraping in the best that they can, while we drain rural areas. And this is not just a US thing. Again, this is a worldwide issue. But it seems to me like you can access the most talent in this a knowledge economy, that global economy, if people are able to stay in place with their networks of personal support, and they at the same time are benefiting that place with their talent. And that's seems to be from that standpoint, a more efficient way. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to comment. It's probably going to be a little sideways, and then I'll somehow come back straight on this conversation. But you also think of the effects of that. So, what are the effects related to congestion, pollution, the effects of rising housing costs and goods and services? And so, when everyone's flocking to these major cities for these opportunities, there's a whole lot of effect on those cities as well. And sometimes those get overlooked, and you sit back and think of that. And then you think of, the quality of life. And I always tell people it's the term that I dislike the most when it comes to economic development. I'm just gonna be honest. There's a lot of terms I've probably said in this podcast already I don't like the most. What is quality of life anyway? It's whatever it is to someone. Trust me, to everyone it's different. It might be a beach, it might be
It's like asking, what is good art to you? It's like, not going to be
but
the same thing.
They always try to make it one thing, and I say, yeah, we don't know. It might just be that someone wants to work from home, where they're from, raise their family, and that's their quality of life. And so we need to give them the opportunity to do that there, and not have to say the only way you can have access to that same quality entrepreneur, education or that job is if you get up and leave, West Texas, and I'll use Abilene, Texas, and head to Dallas, Fort Worth, or Houston, or Austin. Like, we should be giving those resources out there in Abilene. And that's the only time you'll ever hear me kind of sound like I'm from Texas when I say the word Abilene.
You're doing a much better job than I could. I am very much from New England when I talk. No kidding.
But it is this thing that we shouldn't always just aspire to draw everyone to these major activity hubs, because not everyone wants to be there.
No. You should be able to have pride in place.
Absolutely. And what's more prideful in place than building something for yourself in that place and then employing someone from your own community? I can't imagine the feeling if you were somewhere and you got to hire people local in your community. I mean, golly, it's life at its best.
Yeah, that's why so many of us go into entrepreneurship, right? It's leading by example.
Yeah.
Feels gratifying.
Absolutely.
Well, any final words? So much of what you said is really inspiring us here, and I appreciate both some of the more pragmatic parts of the experience that you've had. You're sort of recounting those things for us, and also just the inspiring parts too. Any final thoughts?
I always say the final thoughts. First, Scott, this has been a blast. I enjoyed this conversation and the conversations we had and will continue to have. But what I would just say to everyone is, wake up thinking about how you can affect the next generation. That's it. When you think about building a company, if you're in economic development, if you're in government, whatever it is, think about how it'll affect the next generation, not just this generation, and build plans and ideas that do something that create generational change. Everyone I've come in contact with all over the world, beautiful humans everywhere. And we need to be thinking about what are we doing for the next generation and how are we going to inspire them. And we'll start to build better cities, and these cities will continue to thrive all over the world, not just in these major hubs.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Robert Pieroni is director of Italian business development for Generator. We are all big fans of Generator, and you are our first Generator guest here at the Are We Here Yet podcast. But not just for that reason. It has been a pleasure having you here, recounting your experiences down there in the great city of Houston, Texas. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.